Hi, I'm Brad Barham. I'm an alumnus of UC San Diego, where I graduated in 1981. Today I'm speaking to you in the lobby of a building on UC San Diego campus that acknowledges the Kumeyaay Nation. This nation encompasses sections of San Diego and Imperial counties, as well as Baja California, Mexico. 100 years ago, Kumeyaay people lived on surrounding mesas. There are photos throughout the foyer showing their faces and earthen homes. I'm sure that in this arid environment, they valued water highly and worked hard to secure it. Water often holds spiritual value for tribal communities that cannot be quantified. Simply put, water is life for many tribes, and when water isn't present, that can mean death.
The Navajo Nation has one of the highest rates of infection in the U.S., and sadly, with few resources and little infrastructure, it's one of the least equipped to handle a health crisis like the one we're in right now.
The Navajo and White Mountain Apache tribes suffered some of the highest infection and mortality rates in the country, higher even than New York City at the peak of its infection rates in the spring of 2020. Nationally, the risk of COVID-19 infection among Native Americans was 1.6 times higher than that of whites, and Native Americans were twice as likely to die of the disease. A lack of access to clean water may be one reason for this disparity. Tribal members often had to travel to the homes of other members to get water, which can be limited to 2 to 3 gallons per person. Tribal communities often had to balance the need to quarantine with the need to share life-sustaining resources such as water with community members.
It was the pandemic that prompted the project. A lot of tribal members and people I'd worked with, different tribal communities, were seeing the really alarming rates. And, very early on, they connected lack of water access with higher COVID incidence rates.
The tribe had never had drinkable water in their community. I mean, when I first went out there, there were stock tanks in people's front yards, and there was a water truck that would back up to the stock tank, dump water in there, and then to cook and do anything that required potable water. Then people would come out with buckets and carry buckets of water into their house. So the tribe had never had drinking water. Therefore, there was no economic development.
My name is Ben Lebowitz, and I'm a graduate student in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In the Colorado River Basin, there are 30 Native American nations, and up until the 1908 Winters versus United States Supreme Court decision, these Native nations were not guaranteed any rights to water. Over 100 years later, only some tribes have managed to gather the infrastructure, capital, and legal teams necessary to turn their paper rights into wet rights, or in other words, water that can sustain and improve livelihoods.
To really understand why the tribes play such a unique role in the Colorado River Basin, you have to look at how tribes were historically treated by non-tribal parties, like the federal government, the states, and others. One of the most critical themes to understand here is exclusion. In 1922, the Colorado River Compact brought together the 7 basin states in order to begin the process of dividing water amongst the region. This document is amongst the most foundational within the law of the river. The tribes held no power and no influence in creating the compact. This is especially problematic due to the fact that in 1908, the Supreme Court made a decision that would permanently tie tribal interests to the interests of the basin overall. The Supreme Court ruled that the federal government had the power to reserve the water rights inherently necessary for the present and future needs of reservations. These reserved water rights, tied to reservation treaties, are now referred to as Winters rights. Up until 1952, tension between state control and federal control over water rights in the West was just a game of posturing. While the feds had their hands on reserved rights on both public lands and Indian reservations, states were trying to make sure that they were the ones running the show. The McCarran Amendment of 1952, as well as multiple state and federal court decisions within the following decades, expanded the capability of states to meddle with tribes' federally reserved water rights. This meant that tribes were now forced to pursue settlements with states to quantify their water rights, or face harsh judicial rulings. The case of Arizona versus California in 1963 in many ways changed the environment of water sharing in the Colorado River Basin, including a significant change to the ways in which tribes could settle their water rights. With the creation of the term practicably irrigable acreage, tribes faced a completely new challenge in attempting to quantify their water rights. Tribes would now have to prove, often in court, that they were capable of putting water to beneficial use. And at that time, this use was by and large irrigation. Additionally, this decision indefinitely connected state and tribal water users by bounding the allocations of tribes within the allocations of states. For example, if Arizona has an allocation of 3 million acre-feet per year from the Colorado River Basin, yet the sum of tribal water claims in the state add up to 1 million acre-feet, then Arizona only has legal claim to 2 million acre-feet of water yearly. This provision has created tension between tribal and non-tribal parties, but it has also allowed for both tribes and states to benefit from water trades. We'll dive into this topic a bit later on. As we've already seen, the law of the river explicitly includes the rights of tribes to utilize water within the Colorado River Basin, on paper. In addition to the legal obstacles placed in the path of tribes, such as increased state involvement and the addition of practicably irrigable acreage, tribes face far more challenges. In order to turn their paper rights into wet rights, tribes often must hire lawyers in order to initiate a legal claim for the water. This takes a lot of money. Identify what other parties have a claim to the water and negotiate settlements with them. This takes a lot of pain, time, and money. Trade away their paper rights for resources like infrastructure in order to secure a smaller but quantified wet right, and execute the construction of this infrastructure. This process takes much labor, time, and money. The following graph shows how different tribes have spent varying periods of time attempting to adjudicate their water rights. As of 2020, there were 145 unadjudicated or unsettled tribal claims to water, while by contrast, only 59 tribal claims were either settled or adjudicated in court.
The best case scenario that I can think of is probably the Gila River Indian community. As a tribe, as you're asserting these water right claims, practically irrigable acreage is a potentially really favorable quantification metric. If you have a lot of irrigable land, the Gila River Indian community has, a documented, I think, 1,000 years history of farming prior to, American settlement. And so, they had these, really immense claims to water. But yeah, so it's just this, really huge, legally valid, strong water right claim. And, what they have been able to do with that water has been, really impressive. So it's the Gila River Indian community. I'm just going to say GRIC for brevity, but they're actually the ones constructing their irrigation system, as opposed to, other tribes where it's Bureau of Reclamation. And so yeah, they've been really motivated in terms of being able to construct this irrigation system. They settled in 2005. The system is projected to be finished by, I think, 2029. But, they're making progress, and that's a lot more that you could say for a lot of other tribes.
The deal allotted the Gila River Indian community 653,000 acre-feet per year. This is 3 times more water than municipal and industrial use in Tucson every year. Of this allotment, 311,000 acre-feet come from the Colorado River. The rest comes from groundwater and other rivers like the Salt, Verde, and Gila. The Gila River Indian community have also bolstered the federal Colorado River system since 2016 by storing over 370,000 acre-feet of water in Lake Mead, plus 130,000 more acre-feet in 2022 to keep lake levels high enough to prevent a water shortage declaration. In return, GRIC has received $274 per acre-foot of water that they have leased to the federal and state government. They also market their water from aquifers to willing suburbs and subdivision builders interested in long-term leases. Tribal water rights and tribal well-being in the Colorado River Basin are eternally connected. For centuries, tribes within the United States have not been granted adequate inclusion in broad policy conversations, causing tribes to repeatedly receive the short end of the stick. What remains to be seen is whether or not tribes will be able to self-determine their role in the basin, or if the states will continue to put themselves first. While history would show us a majority of the latter situation, the basin is trending towards an equitable decision-making table, with the tribes in the position of their choosing.